Aaron Hale arrived at the tower when the city was folding into night. Lights in the high windows looked like teeth. People moved in small, careful groups below. He walked with his hands in his coat pockets. He did not look like a man bringing down a syndicate. He looked like a man with a small, honest plan. The room they gave him was long and bright. A single table ran down the center. Chairs sat waiting. Cameras hung from the ceiling like watchful birds. Aaron sat at one end. He kept his back straight and his eyes steady. He had practiced that look until it felt natural. 3 envoys from the Black Osprey Syndicate entered with soft steps. They wore clothes that did not crease. Their faces were calm. Their leader had a ring that hummed when he moved. The second wore a collar that shifted color with the light. The third barely smiled. They were the kind of people who did not like surprises. At the middle of the table lay a contract. It was short and sharp. The contract promised a device. The device would fold a short line of space. In plain words, it would make travel faster and secret. For the Syndicate, that was a prize worth many lives. Aaron tapped the paper with his finger. The sound was tiny. He kept his voice small, too. "This design is real," he said. "It works for short jumps. It needs careful use." The Syndicate listened like men who had heard many lies. The leader smiled once. "We pay on delivery," he said. "We protect our sellers. We do not cheat." Aaron smiled back. He handed a small cylinder across the table. It looked dull. It fit easy in the palm. The leader turned it in his fingers. A blue light blinked inside the cylinder and faded. People leaned forward. A camera made a soft click. Aaron watched the envoys closely. He watched their hands and the way their collars shivered. Inside the hem of his sleeve, he had hidden a small chip. He had placed it there hours before. It was thin as a hair and cold as a coin. He had put it into a seam that no one would check. He had taught himself how to stay calm. Calm hid him better than any voice. He let the Syndicate set the rules. He let them feel in control. The best bait is one a predator can believe. The leader signed the contract with a slow hand. The pen made a sound like a small drum. Papers were folded and moved. The envoys stood, offering hands and words that tasted like polite steel. A waiter crossed the room, carrying a glass. Cameras framed the handshake for later news. Aaron took the hand and felt the ring against his palm. It was warm and heavy. He kept his smile. He kept his thought. The chip under his sleeve had already sent a tiny signal into the room's network. It sent one clean name, Hale. Outside, the city breathed. Ships landed in tiers by the docks. Somewhere far below, someone dialed a number. The name Hale lit up on a panel in a room that smelled of oil and old wires. A light blinked on a board. In that same moment, a thin red dot on Aaron's sleeve blinked and died. Aaron rose and walked with the envoys toward the door. Journalists and couriers waited outside in small groups. The Syndicate men spoke softly of routes and payments. They had already planned the move for tonight. They thought they had a good start. They did not know that their first step walked into a trap. A young courier handed Aaron a thin card. He read the name printed on it. His lips tightened just a little. It was a name he had chosen long ago for this night. The card said only, "Private line connected." Aaron slipped it into his pocket. He kept walking. He did not run. Running makes sounds that can give you away. He moved with the smooth pace of a man who had rehearsed every corner. Cameras watched him. The room behind him grew faint in the glass. In that reflection he saw a figure bow and leave. He saw his own face neat and small. He kept his step and did not look back. When he reached the curb, the rain had not come yet. The air tasted of salt and metal. He paused beneath the awning. Lights moved across the pavement. Someone across the street pulled up a hood and slipped away. Inside the Syndicate tower, A technician in the lower vault watched a monitor. She frowned at the name on the screen. It was small, like a scratch, but clear. The display showed the relay call. It said, "Hail." She tapped the console. The system answered with noise that meant nothing to anyone outside. She called up the old files. The system answered faster than it should. Lines of code flickered and names unspooled on the screen. One of the lines matched a memory she did not want to keep. It showed a name with a picture from years ago. The picture was grainy and only half a face. But the file had a label that made the technician breathe hard. She spoke into the line. "Check. Relay 3. It says hail." Silence followed. It was the kind of silence that means someone is thinking of a plan already in motion. The technician felt her hands go cold. She did not know why the name mattered. She only knew the room on the screen would now wake people who thought themselves asleep. Across town, Aaron walked past shuttered shops. He kept his head low. He held the small cylinder in his pocket like a secret. He had given the Syndicate the thing they wanted. He had given them a reason to move tonight. He had planned every step to look like a clean, legal trade. A camera in an alley tilted to follow him. A recorder captured the angle the Syndicate wanted. The feed would play later, for people to see. The feed would show the handshake, the room, the signature. It would show a man who had made a good deal. Aaron reached the corner and paused. He pressed his palm against the brick. It felt hard and real. He thought of the faces who would not know what had hit them until it was too late. He thought of the small chip hidden in his sleeve and of the name it had sent. He smiled, but it was not for the cameras. It was a small smile for the part of him that kept secrets well. He walked into the dark, leaving his shadow to fall long on the wet street. In the secure room beneath the Syndicate tower, alarms did not scream. They do not need to at first. A single line of light pulsed along a wall. A name blinked there, steady and clear. Then, slowly, a map lit. Paths glowed like veins. The Syndicate's quiet world stirred. A door clicked. Somewhere someone whispered, "Hell." Silence waited like a hand on the edge of a blade. The name Hail moved through the Syndicate like a wind. It lifted collars and made men check doors. Messages ran along wires and through hidden channels. People who had not slept in days sat up and listened. Below the city, in a small flat full of books and old tools, Aaron watched the news feeds. He drank black coffee like a man who did not trust anything sweet. He had expected the Syndicate to react. He had not expected them to move so quick. He needed help. He needed a hand that knew the inside of Syndicate systems. He needed Juno. Juno lived in the part of the city where machines went to be reborn. Her hair was short, and her fingers were quick. Once she had worked for the Black Osprey. She knew keys and routes, and the habits of men who hid money in dead channels. Aaron had found her months ago, in a market where rusted parts sang quietly at stalls. She had not trusted him then. She did not trust him now. He found her in a workshop that smelled of oil and fried wire. She was bent over a board, solder and copper everywhere. When she looked up, her eyes were sharp and tired. "You made a name," she said. "They will burn paths that say it." Aaron gave the small cylinder to her. He said the plan, in short pieces. "We take their courier depot tonight," he said. "We get the manifests. We find the ledger of moves. We show the city what they hide." Juno tapped her fingers on the table. She thought like a mechanic reads a map. "Their depot at Old Crane Row is close," she said. "Heavy guards, but sloppy scanners. They trust numbers more than people. That helps us." They left when the city was dark. Juno carried a small pack of tools. Aaron carried nothing that could show who he was. They walked fast through alleys where the light was thin. Above them, shipping cranes folded like giant hands. The courier depot looked small in the night. It had one gate and many doors. Men in plain coats moved like shadows behind glass. Aaron watched them from a stack of crates. He could hear the depot's hum, machines sorting boxes, voices over radios. The soft buzz of scanners. Juno slipped into the net like a ghost. She tapped a panel on a wall, and the system sighed. Cameras blinked and missed a beat. Aaron and Juno moved inside. Everything smelled like cardboard and oil. There were rows of crates and a maze of shelves. A scanner, red tags. A worker pushed a cart that squeaked softly. Someone hummed an old song. Aaron felt strange. Most of his plans did not need other people's small songs. The depot had civilians. They had faces that looked tired. They had children's drawings taped to a break table. Aaron felt his chest tighten. Found the courier room. It glowed with pale screens. Juno went to a console and began to pull files. Her hands were quick and sure. Aaron watched the door. He watched the way a woman at a terminal kept her hand near a small box that might be a radio, or might be a child's toy. "Too easy," Juno whispered. "We have time for a pull. We'll take the manifest and go." They copied the files into sticky drives. The manifest listed routes and boxes and names. It showed contracts and codes. It showed more than routes. It showed people. A soft alarm whispered somewhere else in the depot. Not a scream, only a note that something did not match. The workers did not panic. Some looked away. Some kept moving. Then a young courier stepped close to Aaron and looked at him with eyes that did not trust anyone with a plan bigger than their life. "Why are you here?" she asked. Aaron kept his voice low. "To stop them from taking more people," he said. She looked at the manifest in Juno's hand. She did not say a thing. Her lips pressed thin. Aaron saw fear and something else, a small, hard place where pity lived. They moved to leave. Juno had one more pull to make. On a lower channel, she grabbed security logs. The logs showed a note. "Permission override at 2:12. The motion came from a locker assigned to Supervisor Kret. She frowned. "Someone opened a back gate," Juno said. "They let a special load through. The files mark it as priority human asset." Aaron's breath caught. The depot was a hub. Priority assets moved quickly and quietly. If the Syndicate had one of those lists, it could move people like goods. The thought made Aaron's hands cold. They slipped out the way they came. Outside, rain started fine and slow. The city smelled of wet metal. They ducked into an alley and reviewed the files. The manifest was worse than they guessed. Boxers, marked as machinery, hid names. Routes were coded with numbers that meant holding cells and private deals. Aaron read and read. He felt the map of the Syndicate's reach spread like a net under his feet. It caught neighborhoods and meeting houses. It touched places Aaron thought were safe. Juno's fingers tapped on a hidden cache. She pulled a small packet of intercepted messages the depot had held for a private client. "These are old," she said, "but they show private relays. Someone uses this depot to pass names." She opened one message. It listed a list of transfers, with times and destinations. At the bottom it had a short note from a sender. "Confirm receipt. Assets, Klein, Mora, Mira, Hale." The world narrowed. For Aaron. He read the name twice. He knew the name as you know the face of a childhood friend. He had not seen Mira in years. She had been careless and brave and full of laughter. He had thought she was far away or safe. The list marked her as an asset. A sound rose in the alley, not loud, only the rustle of a coat. Aaron felt his body pull like a line. Juno looked at him. She saw the change. "You know her?" she asked. Aaron did not answer. His hands shook. He had planned to take down a syndicate. He had not planned to see her name on their list. He looked at the manifest again. The transfer time was soon. It was tonight. The message showed a relay code and a route. It showed exactly when she would move. The rain grew harder. The city blurred. Aaron's plan became sharp and small. He had one more bite in the web. He had to decide which string to pull. Juno put a hand on his arm. Her voice was steady. "We can follow this. We can try to intercept the transfer, but they will be ready." Aaron did not say a thing. He folded the message and kept it close. The depot had given them a prize and a wound. The Syndicate reached farther than he believed. And now, a single name had pulled the fight very close to him. He looked up at the city lights and felt the weave of the web tighten. Somewhere in the Syndicate's towers, men would read a line and smile. Somewhere else, a life marked as cargo would move. He had started the trap. The trap had teeth. One of those teeth had his name in its bite. Aaron sat in a rented van 2 blocks from the Syndicate archive. He watched the tower through a small hole in the blind. The city was quiet in that hour between midnight and the dawn machines. Only freight horns and the occasional footstep broke the air. He checked his watch. Juno checked the drives again. The rest of the team moved like shadows. Mira, quiet and sharp. Cade, who could pick any lock. And Rin, who talked to radios like they were friends. They had a plan that fit into 5 small moves. Move in as maintenance. Fake a system fault. Slip into the archive and copy the record vault. Leave as if nothing happened. It was a simple plan that needed perfect timing. Aaron felt the plan in his bones. He also felt the weight that had grown since he read Mira's name on the depot list. He thought of the crates and the manifest. He thought of the faces at the depot, who worked for a pay and a roof. He thought of the children's drawings that taped the break table. He thought of Mira's laugh. He thought of the ledger that held the Syndicate's proof. They drove close to a service entrance. Juno hummed once, and the van's engine went soft. She had a fake badge and a story. Cade had tools tucked in a pack. Rin kept radio silence until they were inside. A guard waved them through the side gate. The man checked the badge and smiled, the tired smile of a worker who had seen many maintenance crews. Aaron felt the smile like a blade. He told the story they practiced, an emergency patch for a cooling loop. The guard signed the paper and wished them luck. Inside, the corridors smelled of oil and cold metal. The archive was below ground. Lights moved slow. Doors sealed with soft clicks. Cameras looked down like dark eyes. The team walked with their heads low and their breaths small. They reached the archive vestibule. A biometric scanner glowed faint blue at the door. Juno knelt, fingers moving. She spoke to the lock in a soft voice. Cade swept a magnetic pass. It coughed and accepted. The door opened with a tiny sigh. The vault was a room of stillness. Racks rose like sleeping towers. Files sat in glass boxes. The air felt older here, like it kept its memories in dust. Aaron's chest tightened. This was the heart of the Syndicate's memory. If they found what they needed, the city could change. If they were caught, they would be nothing. They moved in small steps. Juno fed the drives, and the vault hummed. Rin watched the cameras feed and fed them with a fake loop. It was the kind of lie that worked for minutes. Those minutes were their world. At the far end of the room, a console waited. Aaron placed his hand on it, and the screen woke. He typed names and dates he hoped would be there. He wanted lists of transfers. He wanted the ledger with the code names and shipping routes. He wanted proof. Files unrolled on the screen. Names floated like ghosts. Moves, contracts, private notes. Aaron scrolled fast. He could feel sweat collect at the back of his neck. His hand found a folder marked with a date and a symbol he knew. The mark, the Syndicate, used for human assets. He opened the folder. Inside were manifests and signed receipts. Each line was a life turned into a number. He read quickly. He felt his stomach drop. The ledger showed more than movements. It showed payments to officials and payments to houses that looked clean. It showed the way the Syndicate buried people in paper. "Get the copies," Aaron whispered. Juno fed the drives faster. Rin kept the camera loop steady. Cade watched the door with a tired calm. Mira stood with her jaw tight. For a moment, Aaron felt that they might succeed. Then a light blinked in the corner of the room. It was a soft alert Rin did not expect. A sensor had pinged. Rin swore, low and sharp. He moved to the console and tried to silence the ping. The loop stuttered. For a second, all was still. Then the archive speakers made a small sound, the sound of a lock resetting. A voice over the system said, "Unauthorized access detected. Lockdown initiated." Aaron felt the blood leave his face. Cade was already moving, but the door shutter fell with a hammering thunk. The small room grew colder as vents changed and lights hardened. Outside, footsteps multiplied. Metal doors began to roll. "Plan B," Juno said. Her voice stayed steady, but Aaron heard the small tremor in it. They had rehearsed Plan B less than they had rehearsed the first plan. Cade moved to a rear exit. Mira pulled a small pistol and watched the corridor. Rin tried to keep the cameras busy, but the system pushed through the fake loop and replaced it with a fresh feed. Faces appeared on the screen, secure text with faces Aaron did not know. A screen snapped to life in the room. A man's face filled it. He smiled like someone who keeps bad news for themselves. "You think you are clever," he said. "We have been waiting." The team looked at each other. Aaron felt the space close. The man on the screen said, "There is a mole in your group? We knew someone would try this. You have been on our lists a long time." The word mole cut the room. They had not expected that. Aaron's mind ran through faces. Who would betray them? Who would trade one of them for safety? Cade moved to a vent and worked like a man who will not be stopped. Juno kept copying files, hands shaking but sure. Rin tried to jam signals. The sirens grew louder. A team of guards poured through the outer door. They moved like trained birds. They had faces without kindness. Cade pushed a metal vent and hoped the tunnel was clear. He squeezed through and vanished. Mira followed, low and fast. Rin dove for a rack and tried to hide. Aaron looked for Juno and found her on her knees at the console, face pale. A guard grabbed Rin and yanked him up. The guard cuffed him and smiled at the screen man. Rin tried to fight, but cuffs clicked and a taser traced his cheek. He went still. Juno reached for a final file and shoved it into her sleeve. A hand grabbed her shoulder. It was quick and hard. A voice said, "We warned you." They dragged Rin and Juno into the corridor. Aaron moved after them. He had to go. He had to pull something from the room. He had to save them. At the far rack, a small folder sat where Aaron had not seen it before. It had a symbol he knew too well. He pried it open with fingers that no longer felt like his own. A photograph slid out. It showed a boy with a wide, crooked smile. The eyes were his. Aaron's hands went cold. His name was handwritten on the corner of the photo. The file card beneath it bore a date and a tag. Subject, Aaron Hale, origin file. The world narrowed into that paper. He had not known that Syndicate kept his history. He had not known they had written him down like they wrote others. He had not known his childhood was a file in this very room. He did not know who had put it there, or when. A boot struck the rack near his hand. A voice barked, "Secure him." Aaron clutched the photograph. He looked at the corridor where his friends had been taken. He could hear the lock mechanisms close like teeth. The photograph trembled in his grip. The archive hummed with a new sound. The sound of doors sealing around them and of old secrets rising to meet daylight. They chose the old relay tower at the river. It was a rusted thing, half city and half memory. People did not use it much now. That made it perfect. Aaron and his team climbed its ladder in the gray hour before dawn. The air smelled of oil and cold water. Their boots beat a steady rhythm on the metal rungs. Inside the relay room, equipment hummed like a sleeping animal. Screens stacked like quiet windows. Antennas thrust through the roof and pointed to the sky. Juno moved among the machines with a calm that was almost tender. She had learned enough tricks to make a public feed listen to the wrong voice. "We have a 1-hour window," she said. Her voice was small and steady. "Once we go live, the Syndicate will fight for the uplink. We must be faster." Aaron looked at the team. Mira stood near the door, face hard as stone. Cade checked the bolts on a crate of gear. Rin held a hand to his ear, listening to the weak bands. There was fear in all of them. There was also a single, bright thing, the need to make the city see. They had the files. They had the manifests from the depot. They had records ripped from the archive. The drives were small and cold in Juno's pack. They were keys to names. They were the proof that men could no longer hide behind walls. When the hour came, Juno fed the feed into the line. The relay took it. For a moment everything was thin and clear, like glass. They were live. Aaron's face filled the screen in the network rooms of the city. He did not wear a suit. He wore a simple jacket and a look that did not pretend to be friendly. He stood under the tower lights. Behind him the city breath rose and fell. "This is Aaron Hale," he said. His voice was steady. It carried through radios and hollas and kitchen speakers. "We have proof the Black Osprey Syndicate moves people as cargo. Tonight, I will show you names. I will show you faces. I will show you how deep the trade goes." At first, people did not know what to do. Families ate breakfast. A tram rolled. Then a feed blinked on in bars and shops and on the walls of office blocks. The city stopped in a dozen small sounds. Kids in small rooms asked their parents what was happening. The feed showed the depot manifests. It showed photos, faces printed, next to crate numbers. It showed ledger lines that named houses and officials and private routes. Aaron spoke while the images ran. He kept his sentences short. He kept them true. "This ledger shows payments to a council house," he said. "This manifest shows transfers to private cells. This photograph shows a child named Klein, moved last year. These are real. These are here." Juno fed one file after another. The Syndicate tried to hit the uplink with a digital blade. Their first strike came as a series of static bursts. The image on the city walls wavered. For a breath people thought the signal failed. Rin laughed once and threw a small jammer into the stream. The signal steadied. People cheered where they watched. On some blocks, neighbors found neighbors and watched together. The upload spread like a stain of light. Then the Syndicate pushed harder. They sent men. Across town, the Syndicate's fleets shifted. Men in black coats moved into the streets with orders that smelled like steel. The city police received quiet calls. Syndicate lieutenants blocked a few junctions. A man with a humming ring called a city official and used language like velvet weapons. The Syndicate wanted the feed down. Arin kept speaking. He read names out loud. He did not shout. He did not beg. He read. He let the proof stand. Faces on the screen looked back. Their eyes held small, bright stories. A woman who had worked at the docks watched with hands clenched. An old man fell to his knees and wept. Inside the Syndicate's tower, envoys watched the feed and cursed in soft voices. They pulled strings and sent orders. They tried jamming bands that carried the uplink. They fed a false feed into the city nets. For a moment a shadow image ran over Aaron's face and distorted his words. Juno caught the false line and split the signal into pieces. She fed alternate routes into the net and made the city see a dozen angles at once. It bought them time, but the Syndicate had more than men and jammers. They had friends in high places. A sudden decree came through city channels, an emergency block on unauthorized broadcasts. Screens across the city flicked to black for a second. People cursed. The transmission returned. Aaron saw the team's time closing. Sweat dried on his upper lip. He pushed forward. He played a short, sharp clip from the archive. It showed a ledger and a face Aaron knew. The screen held it for a long beat. In houses and trains and shops, people saw a name they knew. The reaction was immediate. Phones rang. A hotline filled. The city demanded answers. The Syndicate sent a squad to the relay tower. Mira and Cade met them at the stair. They fought like people with little left to lose. Metal rang. The stairwell filled with a smell of powder and hot air. Voices shouted orders. A camera above the stair picked up the fight and threw it into the live feed. For a second, the city watched the Syndicate's men in their own hands. Then, without warning, the tower's main uplink went dark. The screens froze. Aaron's mouth moved, but sound did not follow. Juno's hands hovered above a keyboard that did not answer. The relay hummed and then fell silent like a throat cut. A single line of text blinked on every screen across the city. It was short and clean. It read, "Feed interrupted authority, Ianja Shadi." The image died. Houses and shops went quiet. People looked at one another and waited, back in a dim room. In a corner office of the Syndicate Tower, the lead envoy watched the frozen frames and smiled. He touched a ring and spoke into a private line. His voice was soft. "We have him," he said. The words moved through the city as a single cold thing. They were not meant for the public. They were meant for people who keep scores in the dark. The lights on the relay flickered and then blacked out entirely. In the silence, Rin's radio cracked with a single line of static that sounded almost like a laugh. The city held its breath. After the feed cut, the city shook with a dozen small shocks. People talked in doorways. Phones rang. Rumors moved faster than the official line. Aaron did not wait for the noise. He moved. He had one last plan. It was a dangerous plan, and it had only a few parts. Get the Syndicate attention to one place. Use their own convoy routes against them. Put a device where the Syndicate would not expect it to be a trap. Stop the ships from leaving. End the trade. The docks were empty at dawn. Crows called from the broken cranes. The wind smelled of fish and old oil. Crates rolled in the soft light. Aaron met his team in the shadow of a gantry. Juno checked the drives again. Cade loaded fasteners into his pack. Mira kept her face like stone. Rin was quiet, hands on a radio that still hissed with static. They had built the device in secret. It looked small and ordinary. It was a beacon with a twist. When the beacon linked to the Syndicate's foldnet, it would lock the local lanes. Ships that tried to jump would find themselves stuck between points of space. The Syndicate ships would be trapped like fish in nets. It would give the city time to act. It would stop one major route. Aaron held the beacon in his hand. It was colder than he expected. He thought of all the people on the manifests. He thought of Mira's name and the faces in the photographs. He thought of the price of breaking a long, dark business. "You sure this will hold?" Mira asked. Juno nodded. "It will lock a lane for a short span, long enough for patrols to cut them off, long enough for a court to get papers, long enough to change the map." Aaron set the beacon in a crate that would move with the Syndicate convoy. They would plant it as a sample in a handoff. The movement would look normal. The Syndicate would not suspect the small thing inside. They also had one more trick. The manifest copies and the broadcast proof were already in many hands. Dozens of small networks would push the files when the moment came. The city would see. That was the first net. This was the second net, a trap at the docks. They waited until the convoy moved. Big forklifts came in, heavy trucks rolled, men with dark coats walked with careful steps. The convoy looked like any other freight line. It had a nervous energy. They watched from an empty warehouse across the water. The Syndicate men were precise and grim. When the transfer happened, Cade slipped close and swapped the crate with the beacon inside. He moved like a shadow. A guard brushed his sleeve but did not look hard. The world was tight around Aaron's chest. He thought of the moment when plans fail or succeed. He thought of the line between the two. The convoy moved out into the fog. Men checked locks. Radios hummed. The ships were not here yet. The beacon's timer ticked in a way no one could hear. At the moment the convoy reached the staging point, the beacon woke. It spoke to the fold net, and the net answered like an old friend. Routes blinked red. The lane locked. The Syndicate's local jump corridors stopped working. A tug tried to fold, and shuddered. It did not move. In the command van of the convoy, voices rose. Men cursed and smashed consoles. The Syndicate sent a call to their towers. They tried to reroute. They tried to force a manual fold. The engines hummed and then went dead. Eyes went wide. A ring on a hand glowed and then stilled. Aaron moved out of the warehouse with Cade and Mira. The patrols were coming, and not the Syndicate. The city's new emergency forces, people from docks and police who had seen the broadcast, moved fast. They blocked exits and flashed orders. The Syndicate men found themselves contained and confused. The ships sat like beasts that could not run in the chaos. A Syndicate envoy found Aaron. He stepped under a rain of papers and shouted, "You think this ends with machines? You think you have the city?" Aaron looked at him and held the photograph he had found in the archive. He thought of his childhood face on that paper. He thought of all the small faces the Syndicate had made into files. His hands did not shake now. He spoke, low and steady. "This ends because people will not look away." The convoy men were detained. Some were angry. Some were suddenly quiet, as if someone had lit a fear inside them. People in uniform cuffed wrists. Cameras made their faces small and public. In houses across the city, people watched men they had never seen, accused of small cruelties. The city began to demand more. But the victory had a cost. Rin did not make it out of the stairwell during a clash near the relay. He had given his radio to jam a final line and had not returned. His name did not go on any manifest. Mira found his body later, small and still behind a crate. She held him and wept. Cade refused to look away. Juno sat under the gantry and held her head in both hands. Aaron felt the cost in his bones. He had wanted to end a trade. He had wanted to save faces. Now he counted them in a quiet list in his head. Each name was sharp. The Syndicate's central tower did not fall that day, but its business changed. Banks froze some of their accounts. A handful of officials were questioned. The Black Osprey lost routes and suffered public shame. Some members were put behind bars. Their trade slowed. Aaron watched the hearings on a small screen in a public square. Men he had seen at the table in Part 1 stood stiff and pale. The city moved like a slow thing to fix what had been broken. It would take years to fix everything. It would take time to find everyone. In the weeks after, small nodes of the Syndicate slipped away. They were careful and quiet. They used old passwords and changed names. They were not destroyed. They had only been hurt. In back rooms and distant harbors, whispers began again. New men took old jobs. New rings began to hum. Aaron sat on a bench by the river and watched a ferry cross the water. The beacon had worked. The trade had been cut at one major route. The city had changed. People he had never met sent food and letters. Mira taught children from the dock side how to read. Juno rebuilt parts for those who needed them. Cade kept watch. Aaron kept the photograph in his pocket. He touched the edge sometimes, as if it were a map. He had closed a long chapter. He had opened a scar. He had made enemies who would sleep and plan. One night, far from the docks, a small freighter touched down in a silent bay. 2 men unloaded. A crate with careful hands. They did not read the manifest out loud. One of them wiped sweat from his brow and smiled at the other. "We wait," he said. "We rebuild in dark corners." Aaron felt that somewhere in the city, a whisper began to grow like mold. The Syndicate had been hurt but not finished. The fight would continue. He stood and walked away. The river moved, the city changed, and the names on the manifests began to find their way home. But the shadows did not disappear. They only shifted,